Well, the 7 people out of the 30 who, I guess if we include the people who were remote, the 9 people out of 30 who were here.
And done this in your office.
Could have. Attendance is getting really bad. Does anyone have any ideas about what I can do to convince? I think you're the wrong subset of the class to ask about this, but I ask any other professor and they say pop quizzes, and I'm really against pop quizzes. I hate it.
I mean, Dan Lee, the SQL, she just said at the beginning of the quarter, she's like, make sure you come, because if you don't, there could be a pop quiz that's like whatever.
Yeah,
And she never even gave a pop quiz.
yeah.
She also doesn't understand the lectures.
Oh yeah, that's probably the other big thing is
Yeah.
videos.
I do, but I also look at how many people look at the videos and the average watch times of those videos. The average watch time is about 4 minutes and I get about 10 views.
Yeah,
So if there are 20 people missing and the average view time is 4 minutes out of a 50-minute class.
that's why I don't even get it confused. But we were talking about it and it's like, what, $50 a day?
Yeah.
And you're like, here's the class total.
I don't know.
Why are we here?
Because the camera in the other room doesn't work, so I can't record it.
Oh. I thought it was weird, so why are we going over here?
I checked the classrooms that were closer, none of them worked. That were free in this hour. This is the closest free classroom with a camera. That's what I've been doing for the last hour. All right, so in this class, we have the Builder Lab due on Monday. How's that going? For those of you who haven't got started, get started. I've already received a couple of questions about it, and some of those questions I don't have an immediate answer to, or I've been digging around for an hour and have not been able to find an adequate reason for why your program is not working. So get started. It gives me enough time to help you find a solution to your problems, because it might not be instant. You can expect that the factory lab will be revealed on Monday, due in about a week. So there will be another one for the rest of the quarter. It's probably going to be about a once per week lab. You can expect that tomorrow we're going to be working on our projects. So please try to come to tomorrow's class with as fleshed out a UML as you can for your project. And that way we can discuss where you are with that. I'd like to have people drawing that on the board so that we can get some feedback and really get you off the ground, because if you put off the coding for this until the last week, you're not going to submit something that you are happy with. So it is time to get through the design portion of this and get into the implementation part. So come tomorrow with a UML and we can talk about each other's UMLs. Today, though, we're going to talk about the singleton pattern. So singleton is a fun one. It's not the most complex, but there are some complexities hidden underneath the hood with it. So we should talk about it. So when we make objects, when we instantiate them, when we call the constructor, or if it's a factory, if we use the factory for something, we're used to being able to create an arbitrary number of them. If you have designed a person object, you are able to create an arbitrary number of persons. If you create what else have we done? A mallard duck class, we're used to being able to construct an arbitrary number of mallard ducks. There's no logic in the constructor that says you can't make another one of these. But you can imagine there might be some instances, like there are static methods in an object that all refer back to the same single method logic, static fields that all refer back to the single static field. We want the ability to have a single static object and not be able to construct additional objects. Any examples of some things that you might only want there to be one of out there? Yeah,
Maybe like a scanner, possibly.
yeah, well, probably, you could have scanners pointed at different things, but you wouldn't want scanners pointed at the same thing, probably. A single instantiation, whereas if there were more instantiations than that, that would be bad. How about something like a database connection? You want to connect to the same database using multiple connections or website connections. Maybe if you have programmed something in a certain way, you want it so that only one connection is allowed to what you have at a time. So if you're gonna make a connection object, then you would want to make sure that there's only ever one of those connection objects existing at a particular point in time. How could we accomplish this? What would we need to do in order to construct an object such that there's only one of them in existence at a time? If I ask you to do this right now, you have the tools. Make it private? What would that do?
Class.
Yeah, so we could have a public constructor that calls a private constructor and only allows for the construction of the object if one of them already exists. The first thing I thought of. So what would that do? You would want to make sure that the private constructor doesn't make the object, but here's the issue. We need the object to exist to be able to call the constructor. So as good of an idea as it is, it's not going to work. If we make a static method, we know that static methods exist without an object instantiation. But with a static method, how do we actually make the object? The solution to this whole thing involves taking these two ideas and putting them together. A private static constructor. So let's take a look at what this might look like. No, did I do this wrong? I probably did this wrong. Here we have a singleton class, and I'll zoom in on this so you can see it. We're going to say a private static singleton that is we have a field of this class that is the one instantiation of this class, unique instance. So a static variable that always exists, it's either null if it hasn't been instantiated, or it has that unique instance if it's been instantiated. The constructor for this will be private and do nothing. And then we have a get instance that is going to check the value of unique instance. If unique instance is null, then it's capable of calling the private constructor. If it is not null, then we do nothing and return the existing instance of that object. So we can't make additional versions of that object. Does this make sense? So we have a field inside of that class that is that itself. It's null. We can say get instance, and either get instance creates the object if the object doesn't exist already, or returns the existing object if the object already exists. However, this still doesn't work. It works most of the time. But can anyone think of a reason why this would not work?
You can make multiple calls.
So. Yeah, so this is almost completely correct. Almost completely correct. So the top right here was the first, it should have been the first thing that we talked about. That's not gonna work. Because we don't have the static unique instance that we need here. So this solution, the bottom left solution, is really good and almost perfect. Think about a hacker. If you were a hacker trying to abuse anything and everything at your disposal, how could you get multiple instances out of the bottom left code? Requires a bit of an advanced technique, but it's one that you've all heard of before. What if I made multiple driver classes? I assigned each one of those driver classes to a separate CPU thread. And then I had all of them call get instance all at exactly the same time. What would happen? Unique instance isn't set to be not null until that constructor finishes. So if I get into get instance before unique instance is not null, I'm going to be calling an arbitrary number of those constructors. So the answer is multi-threading and accessing this function very, very, very quickly in succession before it has a chance to finish. So what we need to do to this is we need to make it what is called thread safe. So that's the difficulty with singleton. Singleton is a very simple pattern with this one big flaw. That if you don't consider multi-threading, then someone with malicious intent can create multiple instances of your singleton. If they know what they're doing. And whenever you design code, you have to design it for someone who knows what they're doing. If they're interfacing with your code, you have to design it like they know nothing. And if you're designing it for security, you have to design it like they know everything. So you have to know and be able to program for everything in between knows nothing and knows everything.
Wait, so, but is it common to assume that the user is an idiot and will try to actively break the code?
Yes,
Which was sort of like, say the whole right joke is off the program ready to, I was into a bar, the bar still breaks anyways.
yep,
Because even if you're for real, the user still buys up your brick. Right?
absolutely. So it solves the basic issue. There was still the way to make multiple objects. And if different threads enter the method before the first thread finishes, you can make an arbitrary number of unique objects. That is the basic idea. As many as enter before the first thread finishes is going to be the number of copies of this singleton that you have. So there are a lot of instances of this unique instance, which should not be allowed. There is a keyword in Java that allows you to override this. And it's something that you need to be aware of whenever there's a multi-threading related attack that can be made on your code. And that is the keyword synchronized. So if you include the keyword synchronized, that means that if a thread is going to enter this and there's already a thread in process, the thread that is in process must finish before the new thread is allowed to enter. So that way we force the second thread to bounce off of it. The unique instance will already be instantiated because the constructor will have been called and finished by the time we allow the second thread in. The implementation of this keyword synchronized is very complex, which is very nice from our perspective that it's just built in and you can use it, synchronized. But it's worth thinking anytime that multiple threads could be dangerous. You can use this on any method that says that no two threads can enter this method at the same time. Very, very useful keyword in certain circumstances. Usually you don't need to worry about it. If two different threads are trying to add a number at the same time, big deal. Most of what you write, it doesn't matter if there are multiple threads accessing it at the same time. There are some times though where it really does matter. When it does matter, synchronized keyword. There are still some flaws, even with synchronization. One, it's actually very expensive to ensure. The actual code behind the synchronized keyword is complex. And it leads to performance degradation on your application. So you don't just want to use the keyword synchronized without realizing that there's going to be a performance hit. It's only going to be worthwhile if you really need to prevent that multi-threaded. It's also completely useless. After the first singleton is returned, the object exists. We don't need to check for synchronization after the singleton exists. We only need to check it if it's null. So wouldn't it be great if we could find a way to only check the synchronization if the singleton doesn't exist? Once the singleton exists, as many threads as you want can bounce off of it at the same time, but we shouldn't have to check it. You can imagine some kind of DDoS style attack against this, where you have 10,000 threads trying to access it at the same time, which creates 10,000 synchronization calls while each one of them are sitting waiting for each one to finish to bounce off of. That could really slow down a real-time application. Make it really slow. So instead of doing that, it would be great if we had a solution to that said only check the synchronization if the object is null. So how could we do that? The solution is going to be to make sure that we create the instance within the singleton class. So no outside code can directly call the constructor. So now we actually make the object inside of the class. We don't make the object inside of the constructor. We're calling the constructor in the static field. That means that this singleton always exists. If you do this, the code is thread safe. There's no way for an outside user to attempt to create one of these objects. The instance and the only instance of it already exists within this class. The fact that this class exists means that the constructor has already been called. Normally, we don't do this. If we have a field, we don't call a constructor for that field, we wait for the construction of that object. Because usually a parameter to the constructor is what's dictating what should be made and what values should be in there for that object. But that's very different for a singleton type object. For a singleton type object, it's perfectly fine for the object to already exist when you compile your code. As part of compilation, it's going to make the object. And not wait for runtime creation. Questions on this? Do we have any other options that would make sense? There's something called double checked locking. if you do this, then you can first check and see if an instance is created. If the instance is not created, then call a synchronized method to do the creation. So you would use something like this. Notice how now the get instance is not synchronized. We can then use an if statement to check whether the object is null. Only if the object is null, then we use the synchronization, and here's the syntax for how to use a synchronization inside of a method, rather than saying synchronized as a keyword inside of a method declaration. You just say synchronized, and then you use the class name. In this case, it's singleton.class, it gives you the class of that. And then you can check if that unique instance of that singleton class is null,
Wait,
then you make the new singleton.
volatile?
Yes, we need volatile for this.
Okay, that's a new one for me.
It is new, so. Now it's basically saying, this says at the bottom, the volatile keyword ensures that multiple threads handle the unique instance variable correctly. When it's being initialized to the singleton instance. So you just need to make sure that you include the keyword volatile on the field when you do this. You check first to even check if you want to do the synchronization. Once you do the synchronization, then you do this. So the only time multiple things are gonna be slowed is if the object is null. The only way we're even checking the synchronization is if the object is null. Then we wanna check the synchronization, so we need to check if it's null again, because if it's not and it's been instantiated in the meantime, we want this to bounce off. So it looks really repetitive and unnecessary. But this just ensures that if it's not null, we don't do the synchronization. If we do the synchronization, then we again check if it's null to make sure, are we even allowing the first thread in to be able to create this unique instance? Because it's synchronized, only one thread at a time is going to be able to access this. But we're only checking the synchronization. As soon as that first one is made, our program can't slow down anymore because all of the further attempts to create one of these is going to bounce off of this first if when we call the get instance. So there's very little opportunity to slow down our application. Questions on this? So singleton is a really simple idea with very complicated problems that arise from one single simple kind of attack that can exist. But other than that, it's actually a very simple pattern. It's very easy to implement in a way that is easy to attack, and it's very difficult to implement in a way where that attack is. You need to be aware of the attack and aware of the tools that you have to be able to make sure that it's safe. And that's it for the singleton pattern. It is the shortest pattern we're going to cover. It is the simplest pattern we're going to cover, but just know about the multi-threaded attack, know about the ways that you can handle getting around that. Questions? All right, I wanted to do something a little bit short today because if we're going to be going over those UMLs tomorrow, I wanted to give people a little bit more time to talk to me and to work on those in the meantime. So we're going to spend the rest of today's class just going through and finishing off those UMLs. Make sure that you get a chance to ask me about how you think you're going to get stuck between today and tomorrow. And that will ensure that tomorrow goes as smoothly as possible. So I guess I could ask, how is it going? How do you feel about your UML designs for your project? What can I do? Where are people stuck?
On the, like the reservation.
uh. How like. I should go about. Storing multiple tickets inside the reservation, I was thinking about using. I don't know if this is a good idea, it might be a really bad idea, but I was thinking about making that like the decorator. So like each ticket would be like the decorator that would like change the that would just sort of like add on. That way I wouldn't have to use a list, but
So I think you're still gonna want some kind of list to store the tickets. Because if you decorate the reservation with the associated tickets, you lose access to the individual tickets. If you need to construct those tickets step by step, if you're using that for a builder. Then you have to start stripping away the layers to be able to get down to the base object. So I like the way you're thinking, but I think that's gonna create some issues when you go to implement it. So if I'm trying to think about how to make a reservation, we have a reservation class. So we know we're gonna have some kind of list of tickets. This could be an array list of tickets, it could be a linked list of tickets, it doesn't really matter, it's just some kind of collection of tickets. And then each one of those tickets is going to need to be built. So the reservation is going to act kind of like a driver. In that the reservation is going to query the user for the information for these tickets. So I say query user for ticket info, that's gonna happen somewhere in the reservation. I would have some kind of method or collection of methods that try to get information from the user in some kind of useful order. It's going to need to gather that information and send that information on to the ticket builder. Well, it should be the ticket director, the ticket builder director, probably. The ticket builder director is gonna collect this information. So this is all of the logic for constructing a ticket. Now it's logic for communicating, I guess, yeah, communicating the construction of the ticket. So here's where the data should be stored, not in the reservation, but in the ticket builder director. Once the ticket builder director has the associated information that it needs to be able to construct the ticket, it's going to have the logic for interfacing with the ticket builder. And this constructs the ticket. But note that for your reservation for each ticket, you may not have all the information right away. So you may want to write some methods like add this to the associated ticket, add this to the associated ticket, and some kind of checker that says, is this ticket now complete, yes or no? Once the ticket is complete, then it can return the completed ticket to the ticket builder director, which can return it to the reservation. In this way, the user has no way to interact with the ticket builder whatsoever. We have encapsulated the logic of building a ticket beyond what the user has control over. But note that part of building the ticket is gonna be interfacing with the other half of this project. Which is coming up with what airline are they flying? So we're gonna need to do some kind of lookup in the ticket builder for, on that day, which flights are there between the intended source and destination. You need to get a ticket on that flight, which means we need an associated seat. We need to fill that seat on that plane. We need to, there's a lot of other work that needs to happen as part of this building process.
Would you have to? Could you kind of like? I guess sometimes like. You just like break it down a little into like smaller sub problems. I
That's
guess,
gonna depend on your own implementation.
well, like, could you, so. I guess one of the struggles I'm having with is like tying everything together. So it's like, would you have to make a seat builder director and another seat builder?
No, probably not. So there's gonna be existing airplanes. So let's say we have,
So then like, how would you connect that? Like,
Yeah. we have some airplane hierarchy or, you know, some kind of Boeing jet. Call it a 747, and we have some other concrete ones. So let's say through this ticket builder, from the communication from the reservation and ticket builder director, so indirectly from the user, we're getting that they want to fly a very long distance in the country. So we need a large jet for that particular flight. So maybe we're flying from Spokane to New York. And so the ticket builder needs to have some kind of logic to figure out and look up what flights are there from that source to that destination. And we will see that there are, maybe you have a flight class that is composed of an airplane. And we can have some kind of flight lookup that allows the ticket builder to interface with the flight. Again, I'm just kind of making this up as I go. The actual structure for this is gonna be up to you. I'm not specifying it because now it is your task to construct this logic of how exactly this is going to work. So the ticket builder needs to figure out how is a flight going to happen. So this particular flight from Spokane to what's a New York airport code?
NYC.
Who knows? NYC. Yeah, it is JFK. All right, so GDG to JFK. So there's some flight that's gonna use an airplane that's of type Boeing 747. So we're going to make an instantiation of this airplane that says this airplane goes on this flight. Maybe it is Boeing 747 flight, we can call it, I don't know, flight 1000, that does this flight every day at 2 p.m. Who knows? You can make up some number of flights that become a lookup for the user. And then say, okay, we can grab this. So on flight 1000, there is this particular seat layout on that plane where we have some kind of aisle. And then we have A, B, C, and D. If it's a Boeing 747, it has a lot more than this, but I'm just gonna use this as a, we have, you know, row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't need to store this representation in any capacity, but let's say for the sake of argument, this is a really tiny 747, doesn't exist, with 8 rows in it. So the available seats are seat 1A, seat 1B, seat 1C, seat 1D, seat 2A, seat 2B, 2C, 2D. We need some logic that when this ticket builder requests a seat on this flight, we need some way of selecting the associated flight. Now here is where we could use the seat decorator that has a seat class So this would be a two-dimensional seat array that's stored inside of this airplane that is the seats for that plane, for that flight on that day. We would then have some kind of search that says, all right, they wanted a non-first class seat. So maybe the first 2 rows are first class. And this is economy. If they wanted an economy ticket, we will search and find that 3A is available. We're not gonna let them pick their seat. That's a little bit too complicated for this for the moment. But let's say this could return the string 3A as an open seat on this flight, and then turns this into a filled seat on this airplane. So part of this airplane object, this Boeing 747, is instantiated for this flight from Spokane to JFK. It has a two-dimensional set of seats that are in its field for that airplane. The ticket builder will request a seat on that flight that is not first class. If it were first class, then you could take this seat object and you could decorate it with a first class object. And that could take the cost of that seat and double it, who knows? First class is expensive. But we could do something with that changes the cost of that seat, such that when the ticket builder tries to say, what is the cost of this ticket? It could look at the seat on that flight and say, are you decorated? What is your get cost of that seat in that flight? There's a lot here, isn't there? Again, there's nothing that says you have to do this way. This is probably how I would go about designing something that does something like this. But you can see that the implementation is there's a lot of communication happening, which is why it's important to draw out that UML and really think about it in advance.
So would you have to make builder patterns, or I guess builder UMLs for the flight and airplane too?
No, I would have a single builder,
So just for the ticket?
just the ticket builder. I would hard code everything else. You can make, I don't know, 3 possible flights. Don't make 80 of them. Make a very few number of possible flights. We can go from Spokane to New York. We can go from Spokane to Seattle. We can go from Spokane to LA.
I just wanted to clarify, one thing about the builder.
Yeah.
Or just for like the builder class in general, so. This is only for like. Stuff that's just gonna be automated on its own, right? Should we, like getting them the name and date of birth, should that be like separate from the builder class or?
It'll probably be part of what's needed for the ticket builder. So the ticket builder will need to throw together everything that's needed for the ticket. So you may have the reservation, you communicate with the user. I need a reservation of 1 ticket. Great, this ticket array is of size 1. So it'll query the user for that ticket information, like the date of birth, the associated thing. We don't have a ticket yet. The reservation is not capable of creating a ticket. The only thing that can make a ticket is the ticket builder. So we need to communicate this once the user enters their name and their date of birth. That will be something that the reservation passes to the ticket builder director. The ticket builder director will collect all of that information, and then once it has an associated amount of information that's necessary to create the ticket, we can't create the ticket if we don't have all of that information ready to go. Once all of that information is filled, the logic of the ticket builder director will call the ticket builder and pass all of that information.
How should the hierarchy go for the airplane, airline and airport? Should it go airline being the parent, the airport and
Yeah, so I would have them all completely separate, and I would have this particular flight that goes from GEG to JFK. There's only one airline that runs that.
So are you just putting that into one class?
Yeah.
And then it'll just be all the information from going from EDD to JFK?
Yeah. And that would be a flight.
And then you just do And then you'll make 2 more just like that with. Like Seattle to GEG and then Seattle to the moon or whatever.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
It's probably do that, are you doing like different
I would do just straight up a decorator for it, so I would make a bag I'd make a. Bag class. And then you can, basically, it would be composed of a ticket. And this would be a bag that's associated with that ticket.
But isn't the bag also associated with the airline? Is the airline part of safety?
That could be a place where you implement strategy. But I probably wouldn't recommend it. I would just say that a bag has an associated ticket. So that once you've created your ticket builder could come back and say, I'm going to wrap this ticket with an associated bag. And then the bag would also have a get cost. And then we would end up with something like we have a ticket wrapped in a bag, and this would be 2 checked bags associated with that ticket. If I were to query this bag's get cost, it would have there'd be some kind of hierarchy here that looks at whatever it's composed of. And says this bag can either be composed of a bag or a ticket. And then the get cost will go in, return, with the associated cost of what happens when you take the cost of the ticket. And add bags to it. I would choose either decorate the seats with first class or decorate your tickets with bags. Don't do both. One instance of decorator is enough. You don't need to overcomplicate it. Just find a place that you can implement it. So maybe a bag is a straight $60 fee.
First class thing with a bag, it was just decorated as first class.
Yeah. You can either decorate it with a first class cost, and that way you could double the cost of the ticket if it is first class for you. Don't make this unnecessarily difficult. I think the design is already really difficult. And that's the main, we have 2 main outcomes. One is to get practice with the design patterns in a simple environment, but it's an environment that you've created. So design of complicated code is also an important skill to build. How do you take a complicated idea and break it down into an object-oriented hierarchy, into an application where all of those components interact with each other in ways that make sense?
How should we implement the aircrafts? Should we just do that from as its own thing?
Yeah, I would have a separate hierarchy like this, where you have an airplane abstract class or interface, depending on if there's any implementation that can be abstracted.
How would you connect that to, so I guess the thing that I'm having the biggest trouble with is just like connecting it all, so
Yeah.
can we connect like our airplane hierarchy to our builder UML, or those are gonna be 2 completely different things?
They need to be connected in some sense, because this is gonna need to figure out an associated flight.
Yeah,
So you could do something in the ticket builder, once the user has entered a source and a destination, the ticket builder will need some kind of like a get flight. So I think it actually might be within the ticket builder itself. So the ticket builder director is gonna collect all of this information, pass it along to the ticket builder. The ticket builder's job is to construct the object. So once we know the particular source and destination of the flight, then we can look up and say what flights exist. Does a flight exist between that source and that destination? If so, then go grab the associated flight number and go look at the associated composition of the airplane. And since that airplane is going to be a Boeing 747, then you can look at the associated plane and look for seats on that plane. So that's how we're gonna connect the logic of do a search for a flight. And maybe it can just be a direct lookup, because again, I don't want there to really be more flights than necessary here. But think about extendability. If this system were being tested on just a couple of flights, but you want to design for this to be able to handle all flights across the United States, eventually, you're designing the prototype right now that supports the first couple flights for testing purposes. But you want to be able to add some additional flights in the future. So do what you can with this between today and tomorrow. We have a couple minutes left still, so I can keep answering questions, but spend some time between today and tomorrow really thinking about how can I put all of this logic together?
Well, for the airplane class, wouldn't you want the flights together in the airline? What if purpose you want this specific airline?
I'm gonna say that would be a great way to extend this in the future if we had different airlines that ran the same flight path. But for now, let's just associate a single airline with a single flight.
So then would we just put? Would you just put all of your?
This would be a composition. We'd have a separate, airline hierarchy that has, we have Alaska, Delta, United, et cetera. Just make a couple of them. And then for a particular flight, there's gonna be some particular airline that runs that flight. So we can make a composition of those things. And these are gonna be very bare bones things. The airlines don't do very much, but this is another place where you could have something like a boarding strategy. So you could make an associated boarding strategy where you print, like board group A, board group B, board group C, board military, board something, board who knows, come up with a couple of different ways to print out the boarding methodology. And then you could have each airline be composed of a boarding strategy. And that would be a way to use the strategy pattern for a place where you could do that.
You could have like Southwest.
Yeah. Yeah, a boarding strategy that is everyone get on the plane. Or you could make a boarding strategy that actually makes sense, where you load it from back to front instead of front to back like an idiot. So we'll call it here for now. There's a lot of design on this board. Come up with something that makes sense. Remember that the only requirements are on the page. How you put all of that together is up to you. All I'll be doing when I grade it is look at, does this system make sense? Can I use it? Does it build me a ticket? And does it adhere to the 3 design patterns that we care about?
Could we just put, so we have a flight hierarchy and then we have our 3 different types of flights. Could we just put like the specific number of layovers, day and time of the flight, like can we just make one of those?
Yeah. And then it just becomes something that gets printed on the ticket. And that could become extendable. That is something that you could factor out into its own class and its own design pattern in the future, but let's not worry about that for now.
Sure. The way that you hear sometimes this is more like Google Lights or like
Yeah, it's more like
the
Google
United
Flights.
app. It's more like Google Lights.
Yeah, is that it's gonna go basically take you to that, when we do this like get flight, you can imagine that this is going to the airline's website and getting all the information, because who fills those seats in that? It is the airline, not Google Flights. Google Flights doesn't have access to Alaska's planes seats. So it has to communicate through that service. So in the future, if we actually wanted to make this happen, there would be some kind of connection here to Alaska's site to book through them. As part of the user getting the information and putting it into Google Flights. So this could get arbitrarily more complicated, as it would be in industry, but we'll definitely start here. This is a lot simpler.
So I have one, the other idea,
Yeah.
so we can take it, the residents who can build it, and then chairs. Inherits the flights. And then has a, also the airplane and that's a different types of planes, and then it goes to my airline. And then I can touch the flights.
They're perfectly fine, as long as you build in you shouldn't need too much more than that. As long as you have a builder, which you have, decorator, so find one of these components that you can decorate. And then strategy, something that is an algorithm or a behavior that will encapsulate and swap out of that. So the boarding as an idea for strategy, you could have a boarding strategy where Alaska boards to put away, but let's say suddenly we need a smaller aircraft for something, we need to board it slightly separately. Then we could, and we want to, in the future, have another airline that boards the same way that Delta was. We could have a composition between this so that we don't need to copy and paste code from Delta's boarding method to American Airlines' boarding method.
Okay.
Or Southwest boarding method.
You know, let's say we can do Alaska, flies go the same day, so.
Yeah.
And then we do Delta, and Delta's all. Airbus, H8 or something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not over.
Perfectly fine. Yeah, make it as simple as possible, but where possible, make it extendable. So that if in the future, Alaska uses some other aircraft, then it's just something you could swap out.
Okay. See, I feel like, right, I guess I've flown too much, I'm just like, I'm overcomplicating.
I'm
Yeah.
on the same page, as you. I'm like, all right, well. They get to pick their seat, their first class, and you gotta add this.
Don't let them pick the seat. That's gonna be unnecessary complication. Just return an open seat.
Yeah.
That adheres to the class requirements.
They can just be set one, or two, they can.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
exactly what I do,
Yeah.
why?
Just
Make
let them pick
sure-
I let them pick the seat and then.
Make sure that if the next person wants to come up with and buy a seat on the same flight, it's a different seat that gets returned. So you need to build into the seat class some way, some boolean that is filled or not.
That's really.
It's a team.
Yeah, of seat options.
Thank you.
Yep. The paper we give tomorrow, oh yeah, no, there's no grading associated with it. I just want people to be able to showcase what they have so far and get feedback on it. So it's worth doing because this will basically be the way that I say, yes, you should start coding this. It looks good. You're gonna be successful with it. If you don't have that, then you're gonna be waiting, or you're gonna be coming up with issues as you wait to design this until later. We want to get coding as soon as possible. Any other questions from either of you before we kill the recording? All right. If you have any questions, email me. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow.